Hi, and welcome back to the Mom and Mind podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kat. And on this episode, I am joined by Dr. Jessica Zucker. She is a LA-based psychologist specializing in reproductive health, and she's the author of the award-winning book, I Had a Miscarriage, a memoir, a movement. She's a creator of the viral hashtag I Had a Miscarriage campaign. Her writing has appeared in New York Times, Washington Post, New York Magazine, Vogue, and Harvard Business Review, among many others. She's been featured on NPR, CNN, The Today Show, and Good Morning America, and has earned advanced degrees from New York University and Harvard University. And today we are talking about her second book, Normalize It, Upending the Silence, Stigma, and Shame That Shape Women's Lives. And that book is out as of April 22nd and is available everywhere books are sold. And in this chat with her today, she shares about some of her personal experience through miscarriage, through cancer diagnosis, and how silence, shame, and stigma impacted her and her journey. And also, in addition to that, we talk about just in general how we are all as women impacted by these pressures, by what silence, shame, and stigma does to us, and how it impacts us, and how important it is for us to be able to push past that and speak our truth and talk about our stories and be able to feel seen by other people who have similar experiences to us and know that, yeah, we can normalize what we're feeling and how we're feeling, and that it's okay um, to have these experiences, that it's okay to talk about them, and it's okay to need support in the way that you need it. And she really drives home how much better off we could be as a society if we were able to just share and not be silenced. So let's dive into this great conversation. Welcome, Dr. Jessica Zucker. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm glad to have you back on. It's been a minute since you were first here, and you've done amazing work in between our two chats. So, yeah, I'm happy to get into what your newest book is about, but I also love to understand the backdrop of like how people became inspired to write a book, even because it's a huge undertaking and you have to be inspired in order to do it.
That's true.
Yeah. So what led you to write this book?
I'll try to make the long story short, but so as I'm a psychologist, I specialize in women's reproductive and maternal mental health and have done so for about 15 years at this point. And prior to pursuing my PhD, I have a background in public health and worked internationally in women's rights, women's health. And so I always had this vision when I decided to go into clinical practice to combine my background and specialize in all things women's mental health. So I had tried to go to all the conferences and read all the books on the topics and be part of consultation groups and whatnot. Because at the time, my focus and my interests were purely based on the fact that I was a woman, and these are things that I've been passionate about. I had not lived through anything that I could pin to why this was something I was pursuing until, and I believe you know all of this, but until I was cut that, whoops, I don't need to reference that you know this, but so initially my interests were intellectual and all based on my passion from being a woman myself and thinking that these are very important topics. And then I was 16 weeks into my second pregnancy and I had a miscarriage while I was home by myself. I had to cut the umbilical cord myself. My doctor talked me through what to do over the phone. My husband raced home. We promptly went to my doctor's office, brought the fetus in the bag to be tested, and I ended up having to undergo an unmedicated DNC.
Whoa.
Whoa is right. The trauma, the drama, the sort of documentary like elements of the intensity. And this inevitably changed the course of my professional and my personal life. So all the while I had been sitting across from women hearing about the isolation, the alienation, feelings of like talk about perimenopause, disenfranchised communities. Oh my God. Okay, let me start that again.
Okay, it's all good.
For all these years, I had been sitting across from women undergoing miscarriages, pregnancy loss, terminating for medical reasons, stillbirth, the list goes on. And they would share with me about the feelings of isolation, alienation, and how their communities ran for the hills. And of course, this is all based in the fact that our culture still can't seem to figure out what to do with grief, even though
Right.
pregnancy loss is going nowhere. Postpartum depression is likely going nowhere. These are things that are sticking around. And as a society, we're faced with the need to just get better at doing these things, helping women through these things. And so now, not only was I sitting across from people talking about this pain, I was now living it
Mhm.
myself firsthand. So when you ask what led to this book, that's why this is a long answer, because it's the fact that I had studied all this and was interested, but then I physically underwent something so similar and so life changing. And that led to my initiation of the I Had a Miscarriage campaign, which I launched with my first New York Times piece in 2014. And then lots of things happened in between in terms of writing, but that eventually led to my first book project. And that came out in 2021. And that book is called I Had a Miscarriage, a Memoir Movement. And I think it was about 6 months after that, a mental health publishing company came to me and asked me to write a book. And I had many thoughts about, okay, my first book is memoir meets manifesto. It invites people into what I went through in my miscarriage, and it's a window into fictitious patient composites as well. But what about the silence, the stigma, and the shame that surround all the other topics
Right.
we as girls and women go through over the course of our lives?
Right.
So that's what this next book is. It's called Normalize It, Upending the Silent Stigma and Shame That Shape Women's Lives. And essentially, it's very different than my first book. So in no way do you have to have read the memoir in order to dive into this. This is composites of patients, but also lots of research that really begs the question, what are we doing when it comes to the silence, hush around perinatal issues, maternal mental health, grief, perimenopause? The list goes on and on. And starting with actually with menstruation. So
Oh, right.
the book goes from girlhood through menopause and tries to look at the various ways in which culture silences women, silences these topics, and invites us. I think this book is a compassionate invitation into questioning why we've been complicit. Culture teaches us to be a certain way.
Right. Yep.
We don't have a choice in a sense. But then once we're old enough to realize, hey, what's going on here? I have some agency. This isn't comfortable. I don't love walking around with this shame, this self-blame, this self-doubt, whatever it is. What can we do about it?
It's really pervasive in all aspects, especially when it comes to mental health and women's health. Like you're just supposed to, regardless of what's going on for you, you're somehow supposed to not be impacted or affected or just keep going and not complain. Oh, I hate that word, but
Yes,
that's part of the sometimes not always unspoken expectation of
right.
women that just grin and bear it, deal with it, get over it, whatever it is. You're not allowed to have feelings. And if you do, it's seen in this really pejorative way as complaining.
Exactly. And like you're saying, it's like with this get over it quickly vibe. And I think that girls are faced with this when they start menstruating. I think it
Mhm.
begins then. You shouldn't complain about your symptoms. In biblical times, it was seen as quote unquote dirty to have your period. So I feel like girls are still getting those messages. And especially if their friends don't have it yet, I think this is often a time when the shame and the self-doubt start to bubble. And as Dr. Carol Gilligan puts it, and I include this in the book, her game-changing research on girls, like her whole thing is girls have a voice. They don't need to find their voice. They
Nice.
need, though, to feel comfortable and confident embodying that. And that it's culture, like that they hit a ceiling or something as they're emerging during puberty where they are taught to not know what they know, or they're instructed to not know what they know
Right.
about who they are. And that concerns me in a very major way. And it does make me think a lot about, and I'm sure you think about this too, it's like, how does that impact fertility stuff later? Not in terms of fertility, but meaning if one then has struggles
Right.
fertility wise, are they blaming them? Is
Mhm.
this a vestige of the past? Is this culture having taught people to feel this way? And then, if and when women become mothers and they're faced with perinatal and postpartum mood and anxiety disorders, if they are, why is there so much shame there as well?
Right.
It seems all connected.
Oh, for sure.
If we could upend, overturn this. And so the book is really about here are some various ways that we can do that because it is a big ask. Just shout it from rooftops. Just say everything you're feeling all the time. Don't listen to culture and just be your own person. That would be great. But we all grow up in families that inevitably are inundated in the culture we grow up in. So it's a big ask. But my hope is that even by whispering into the ear of a friend or muttering your story or your pain or your grief or your grievances to a neighbor, or if you write it on a piece of paper or in a journal and you burn it, like it's, I don't feel like people have to do what I ended up doing, which I didn't even really plan to do. Like, I don't think you have to get on a soapbox. I don't think you have to
Mhm.
do TED talk about any of these topics
Right.
necessarily. But I think that when we keep it inside, it festers.
Definitely.
And of course, we're believers in therapy. I think
Mhm.
if people turn to a trained professional, that can, of course, unearth a lot of this shame that percolates. It's if we don't deal with these things, it just seems to worsen over time. And then what? Then you're all the more silent. So a mom who has postpartum depression and feels like, wait, is it because I didn't want to be a mom badly enough or I wanted it too
Right.
much? Or if I share with a friend or a family member, they're going to think I'm a bad, quote unquote, bad mother. All of
Mhm.
these things and these pressures keep people receding then into themselves and keep their important stories silenced. So, my whole hope is that we can replace this pervasive silence with storytelling, however that looks for each individual.
Yeah, and there's so much complexity in this with the layers of a societal conditioning and familial conditioning, whatever that is,
100.
culture, like a lot of different messaging about how girls and women are supposed to behave and how we're supposed to take care of other people's feelings too along the way. Like
There's that.
which like it just adds to this silence and shame. Like we not only can we not have our own feelings and talk about them, but we can't have them because somebody else is going to be uncomfortable or they're not going to know what to do with it. It just infuriates me so much, even as I talk about it.
Totally, I know. And then, but what would happen? I'm always trying to figure out not the solution, but just a way through this. So, if we all spoke our truths, would we be met with these stunted silences and awkward looks from people if we were all saying, oh, I am in pain because I had a miscarriage, or oh,
Right.
motherhood is not what I expected it to be, or oh, and even positive things as well. But it's if we could share more, then would our culture not be so uncomfortable talking about hard things?
I think so.
That's the hope.
Which I mean,
Let's
absolutely.
start a revolution. Let's just
Let's go. Here we are. This is the beginning.
This is the beginning of a revolution on the
Right.
podcast.
Well, I mean, it in some ways, like being able to normalize the things that you're talking about and talk about in the book, and then we're talking about, it feels like on one level, we shouldn't have to be fighting for that. That
I
should just be
know.
what it is. But
Exactly.
it is also that hard.
I know. It is interesting. So my daughter's 11 now, and I guess I didn't finish the earlier story. So I have an older son, and then about 3 months after my 16-week loss, I got pregnant again, which
Mhm.
was maybe the scariest next 9, 10 months of my life. Yeah. So she's now 11, believe it or not. And I'm watching her and I'm seeing these sort of good girl vibes sometimes of wanting to be perceived in a certain way, or like a fear that she'll be misperceived or that we'll be disappointed in her. And my son just didn't come to us like that. And so, as much as I feel as a mother so dedicated to trying to enrich her life in a way that maybe mine wasn't, or that most of ours weren't, and grow her up in an environment where we talk about tough stuff and great stuff and celebrate things. And I don't know. I don't know what more to do to try to help what might be inevitable for her in terms of stuff with friends and the
Right.
shame that comes with that, or pubic hair and the eventual period that's going to come. And
Right.
there is a rule book, but even if there were, I don't know that it would do the trick. But so I think we can do our best. We can try to inform ourselves and create a different path for our own families. But I do think until culture changes in a larger way, in a systemic way, we might still be seeing this, especially from our girls.
Yeah, and I think even in, I guess, more Western cultures, that there's maybe a little, I don't know, a little farther along in being able to allow a woman to have more, I guess, outward feelings or not.
Mm.
I'm just like, there are some cultures that still have more suppressive tendencies
That's true.
for women, and for the places that don't have that, that have a little bit more of this freedom, a little bit more of a cultural push, it's really important that in some ways that we're able to do that and push whatever that's called, push it forward a little bit so that at some point it gets everywhere.
I know, but like you would think then that in societies, like you're saying, that are freer, that they'd really be freer. That like we would really talk about. I want to live in a world where we can talk about postpartum depression and anxiety and all the others openly. What would that look like? How do you think women who are affected would feel if they could just say, this is not what I expected, or I am feeling like a different version of myself. And they
Mhm.
got help like this through
Right.
the OBs or through a mental health professional or whatever. And I think it would be a game changer, not only for the women suffering, but their families, of course,
Totally.
because the research shows that if women are getting the help, then the attachment may take a hit and things can happen with the child in terms of their development. So I don't know what more we need research wise to show
Right.
the world that this is now.
Yeah, I don't, that is that's an interesting question and a big question, because you can't really see what forces are at play, quote unquote, that keep us all silent, but we feel it for sure. Still feel it to a pretty large extent, even if you do have tools to
Yeah,
communicate and you do feel like freer to say those things. There's still just stuff that's oppressive.
I know. I feel like after my miscarriage, I did not feel the things that the research shows that a majority of women do feel, which is a sense of blame and self doubt and even body failure. I don't know exactly why I didn't feel that way. I think it was because I had already had a child and I think there must be something wrong with the fetus. And so I didn't go to this
Mm-hmm.
place of thinking it was something that I did or didn't do. And it was true. We found out that the fetus had chromosomal abnormalities. And in some ways, that helped me move forward in getting pregnant again, even though I was terrified out of my mind. But I was just like, okay, this could, of course, happen again, but maybe it won't. And I trusted that my body knew pregnancy and knew childbirth and all of those things. But what I wasn't prepared for was the incredibly disturbing silences and platitudes that surrounded my loss. Because I was comfortable telling my friends or reaching
Mm-hmm.
out to a family member and like sobbing or whatever I was feeling at the time and sharing it out loud. But then to be met with, at least you can get pregnant, you're so strong, you're
Yeah.
going to get through this, just all the things. And look, they're well meaning. These are people who love me and love all the people that they say this to. These are these common platitudes that I think end up making people feel alienated, though, and isolated in
Right.
the very moments they need connection the most,
Yeah.
you know?
That's really true.
So I think we have to crack that open as well. Why are we trying so hard to quiet the pain points when people are even willing to open up about it? You'll be fine. You already have a healthy child. You'll have one again. It's just like, wait a second. You're not a doctor, and
Right.
even doctors can't tell me what's going
Right.
to happen.
Psychic.
Or a psychic, exactly. And it's interesting. And I try to look back on my life prior to my miscarriage to think about, did I ever say these things? Did I ever inadvertently minimize something that somebody shared with me? And I'm sure that I did.
Right.
And
Right.
I think sometimes we do it because, again, this is like what we've heard.
Yes. Yeah.
And who wants to see a loved one in pain? Who
Mm-hmm.
wants to see a
Mm-hmm.
loved one drowning in suffering? But it just doesn't help people to say these at least statements
Right.
or
Right.
reassuring them God has a plan or everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
All this silver lining stuff that a lot of us don't believe in or relate to. And it just made me quieter. When I was
Sure.
doing things like this, I was like, okay, I can't open up to her again. Okay, I can't
Right.
tell him again. It's like,
Right.
why?
Right.
Why?
Because you don't want to hear that anyways.
No,
I'm curious, and if you feel comfortable talking about it,
I
the
do.
difference, the if there was a difference between like your experience through the miscarriage and then the book, so it became very public and people related to you and but knew about the miscarriage.
Yes,
And then you also had breast cancer,
yes,
and that was public also, or you shared it publicly anyways.
yes.
I'm curious if there was a difference in how that was received by people, if you experienced both the silence and the shame and the stigma for both, and if both, was it different? Were you allowed different things?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking that. I feel like because I guess my platform has been so focused on pregnancy loss, I feel like my breast cancer experience is not brought into the conversation as often. And in some ways, it felt like on Instagram that when I did share it, of course, people were loving, but then suddenly I wasn't hearing from anybody. And it was an inconvenience maybe for them because I had been providing content about pregnancy loss for so long. And then suddenly I just couldn't because of what was happening in my own life.
Right.
So I did end up writing a piece for Oprah Daily about this word warrior that surrounds breast cancer. Maybe it surrounds other cancers too, but I don't know. But you
Mm-hmm.
definitely wouldn't hear people calling a man a warrior, I don't think.
Right.
So I just find it troubling and interesting that as soon as I was diagnosed, yet again, like my loved ones were rallying around me, so wonderful, and yet would say things like, "You're a warrior, you're gonna beat this, like, you're a survivor, of course you're gonna get through this." And I'm just somebody who I guess is like into linguistics. So what does language mean and what are you conveying? And
Mm-hmm.
I just ended up feeling like, wait a second. And even the fuck cancer stuff, it's fuck cancer. Yes, fuck cancer. Get cancer out of our lives, but it's not going anywhere. Am I a warrior because I was diagnosed with breast cancer? I don't even know what that means. A warrior to me is like someone on a horse, which I do love horseback riding. So, but like wearing armor and has a sword and all
Right,
this
right,
stuff. It's
right.
like, no, I'm just laying here actually.
Mm-hmm.
And will I quote unquote fight to survive? Yes, I will do what I have to do to hopefully survive. But is it a fault of my own if I don't survive? Does it mean I didn't try or fight, quote unquote, fight
Right.
hard enough? That's ludicrous.
Yep.
And it lacks like the tenderness and like the compassion I
Mm-hmm.
feel that I needed to have toward my body during that time. And that's what I wanted to usher in rather than this, I'm going to soldier through. And there is a fight or flight. Obviously, receiving a cancer diagnosis is, you get stopped in your tracks
Sure.
and are faced with mortality and what does this mean and am I afraid of death and will my kids be rendered motherless, a bazillion
Massive. Yeah. So,
questions
so
that don't
existential and
exactly, and things you never would think you would be thinking about in your 40s and nor do you ever want to. But I don't know, I just don't think that setting it up like women need to fight against their bodies in order to prevail is a good look. I just don't. And again, so many wonderful women in my life use that word and they still do. And I think my mom sent me like a medal that's supposed to be like for a warrior. And it's all well and good. And, but I did feel it does shut you down. It did for me. Maybe some people find that really heartening and empowering or something. I felt, oh, this person doesn't want to hear how I'm really feeling, and that
yeah.
I'm trying to think about why do we fear death? Like I needed to go to these very philosophical places in
Right,
order
right.
to get through this because it was
Yeah.
like, yeah, this one's saying people don't die from breast cancer anymore. And this one's saying you're young. It's not, it's, you caught it early. And it's, that doesn't matter. Like
Mm-hmm.
these are things that, again, people are saying to stave off the fear and the pain and the discomfort. I needed for myself to actually go into it in order to
Mm-hmm.
come up from it. I wanted to decide for myself what is my feeling about my own mortality? What if I die? And I realized in doing that that I fear being in pain, like the
Interesting.
physical pain that I
Yeah.
imagine people feel
Yeah.
before they die if they're dying of a disease.
Yeah.
But other than that, I was like, the pain and the anguish was for my children, the
Yeah.
people who survive you. My hope is that people who pass away are in peace. Anyway, that's a long way of saying that I needed to go through my own process of deciding how I felt about it, but talking openly with friends and family about that process wasn't always met with openness. And so really I talked mostly with my therapist about it because
Mm,
of course she could hold this with me and explore
right.
this with me and she had her own health stuff that I knew about briefly. I didn't know all the details of course, but so yes, there's silence around these things except for these big platitudes.
So
And
interesting.
I think there is stigma. I think it's a different stigma. My breast cancer was gene related. So when I don't have BRCA, but it's a different gene that has been less studied. And so I didn't go to this place of, is it something I did it over the course of my life or something I didn't do, or is it
Mhm.
from whatever, how people can blame themselves for, because there are certain cancers that I guess are lifestyle related or something. So I didn't take that on. And I don't feel shame, but I do feel like I'm not entitled to be as open about where I'm at now as I would like to be. Because
Is
even though, yeah,
is that part that I don't know if they're similar, but are there similarities between the miscarriage feelings and the cancer feelings where you're just like, okay, I have to just keep this to myself
I
then?
think so. I think
Mm,
exactly. I think that it was like such a different, because this was my mortality and not the loss of a pregnancy. I think people could get closer to me about that, because I think people who haven't undergone miscarriage or, yeah, you could try again. This is whoa. But again, the focus would be on, you'll just get the surgery and you'll get it on time, and then you'll do the medication, you'll do the radiation, and you're going to be fine. The doctor said you're going to be fine. So trying to tie it up with a bow. And I I would like to be able to talk more openly these days about what it's like to be living on tamoxifen. So there's a medication I'm supposed to take
mm.
for 5 to 10 years, and it blocks estrogen. So it doesn't throw you into menopause, but it blocks estrogen, which, like, that declines anyway over
Yeah.
time. No.
If you're already in perimenopause too, what?
So it's just like this horrible combination, and
Yeah.
then it affects sleep and affects energy level, all of that. And I've tried recently to keep it under wraps, because I did get the feeling, even with some good friends, how much can they hear about that? Like they're trying to be like, go to a functional medicine doctor. Like they're trying to like advise me on sleep aids and all these things, and I'm like, no. And even my oncologist is stumped at times. So it's like, like, where can I actually talk about this that feels safe and comfortable? I do right now. So this has been very helpful. So I think we have to brave our way to find places where we can talk about things. And even if what happens more often than not is that we're told to be quiet, I still think if we can persist and find a place where we can be loud, or at least vocal, then we have the opportunity to heal, explore, feel,
Yes, yes.
because even through having this conversation, I will walk away feeling a little more comfortable with my discomfort around what I'm still living through.
Mm.
And I think that's so powerful.
Yeah, it sure is. And I love that, right, you don't have to go onto a mountaintop, although
Right.
fine if you want to, but
Yeah, exactly.
like finding your safe spaces. And the part of the book is about storytelling, being able to tell your story and
That's right.
maybe even have some healing through other people's stories.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. The book includes some people going to support groups and finding connection there. And
Mhm.
sometimes it is through reading that we are able to feel like, I can't believe I thought I was alone. I'm not alone. And that is part of my hope, especially, well, in writing my first book and then the second book as well, where people can have those light bulb aha moments where they not only know they're not alone, but they actually feel less alone.
Oh, yeah. Because like pushing past or pushing through all of this conditioning, it does take that. It takes some permission.
Yeah,
Not like you need permission, but we do sometimes. That if we're trying to break through or break past what our conditioning is, you need to
totally.
see it in somebody else, hear it somewhere else, and know that there's a place for your
Yes.
story.
Exactly, and when we see other people's vulnerability, sometimes that is the inspiration. Hopefully, someone hears even our conversation and they think, wow, here she is. She's lived through all this hell, and yet she keeps going and wants to be open and honest about it. And because I think that's how we integrate our lived experience.
Definitely. Yeah. By us talking through it or hearing
By
it
us
from somebody
talking
else.
about, yeah, or hearing about it. It's just through vulnerability that we can be like, oh, I too feel that way. And look at her perspective. That's interesting. What can I surmise from that? Or
Mm.
why does that seem like such a reach for me? Is it my family background that has made me feel X, Y, and Z about myself that makes it hard to access those feelings or that openness?
And you mentioned before, I think I heard you correctly, that there's some research in this book as well, or
Yes.
stuff that not your research, but research.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, not my own. That's
That
true.
research that's referenced is what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
And what did you find in going through this research, either about why there's the silence and shame or why it's continuing, or yeah, what kind of things did you uncover in that process?
Yeah, I came up with a lot of things from various cultures and countries that are included in the book about shame and silence and stigma. But also, there's information in the book about the loneliness epidemic, way that friendships break up, and how we don't talk about that.
Right.
Even what people go through in the aftermath of divorce and how those stories are often quieted. And then the research on perimenopause and menopause, the psychological research,
Yeah.
not the actual physical stuff, but trying to get into like, how do women feel in this phase and what is going on psychologically, and why is it that culture deems us invisible at a certain age, and especially in certain cities or cultures? So I wanted to illuminate those things because it's one thing to show patient stories. It's another thing to then back it up with, this person is feeling this way in part because of, look at all of this information. And also, of course, I take on postpartum mood and anxiety disorders. And there's all this research about pregnancy loss and life after, all of it.
Yeah, that's really important. The context matters to understand. Yes, we're feeling it, but the some of the reasons why we're feeling it, we don't always have access to that kind of concrete information anyways as to what all is contributing. That feels really
Exactly.
important.
Yeah, because it's another way to make us feel like we're not alone. If we know that
Yeah.
40% of women, or whatever the statistic is, are going through X, Y, and Z, it's, oh, okay, I see it here in black and white. And this patient example is showing that. And I feel a little bit like that too. And then they get to see, what does this patient end up deciding to do with their story or with their situation or their challenges? Do they open up? Do they write an anonymous piece? Do they get on a stage and blast it out and see how it moves through and see the difference that can make by not keeping it on the inside?
The book that you've written is incredibly important. I
Thank
like to
you.
give just to be able to say normalize it and is in and of itself for somebody to be able to, let's say, see that on a bookshelf. You don't have to have research to know what that means. That is an important message for people.
Thank
um,
you. Thank
it
you so much.
Yeah, I'm so glad you wrote it and have put it out there into the world. I just think it's amazing. I'm like, this is some of it's coming from your own personal experience, some coming from your professional experience as a psychologist and hearing stories from other people. But if like for people like yourself who can take those experiences and translate it in a way that it's helpful to other people
Yeah.
is just such a gift. I think it's pretty amazing.
Thank you. That means so much to me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I writing a book is hard. And so with both books, went through a lot in terms of how much do I want to share about myself and how much do I not? And is it worth the risk, basically, like to be that vulnerable, to try to help other people, but can it backfire? And so I definitely thought a lot about that, but particularly with the first book. This one, not as much. This one, I do bring in breast cancer, but I don't share my personal story. This book opens, the preface is about my 16-week loss, because essentially I'm hoping that I'm modeling in the beginning of the book what it looks like to actually share our stories, what I did with that, and how that impacted my life and hopefully impacted other people's lives as well.
There's a little bit, I don't know if you would call it a parallel process, but in order to write the
Like,
book about silence and shame and
I
stigma, you
know.
have to get through the same barrier.
That is such a great Insight. Totally. Yes, that's so true. Yep.
And you did it.
I did it with a lot of help because it can be a very sort of isolating and insular process. It's like you're just supposed to sit down and write. And as it's like our work is already isolated in a certain way.
Right,
I work from home now. I don't have colleagues that I'm seeing all the time. So
right, right.
it's interesting, but I do love writing so much and I love writing about topics that I'm so passionate about. So this seemed like a no-brainer.
That's awesome. I thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of this with us. And I'm excited for everyone to get the book.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me here. I'll show it to people again in case they
Yay. I
want to
love
see.
that. I love
I
that.
love how bright it is. I know. I
It's
feel like
great.
the yellow is just so happy and
Yep,
catchy. So
that's great.
thank you for having me.
If you'd like to get connected, go to drjessicazucker.com or you can go to Instagram at I Had a Miscarriage. And do make sure that you're following Mom in Mind or subscribed on whatever podcast platform you're listening or on YouTube. You can both listen and or watch or both. However you prefer to listen to these great conversations, it's available to you. Thank you so much for being here with us. Until next time.